Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Preseason Reports. I'm your host, Joseph Potter, joined today by Chris Ransom and TJ Trumaine Jenkins. Now, I'm going to warn everybody beforehand, YouTube has been not so kind today. It's terminated this broadcast twice. It's not letting things load. So, if we lose anybody, or if you're listening to the playback and this stops, we apologize. Let us know in the comments. We'll come back and redo the show. YouTube does what YouTube does. And if it has technical difficulties, that's a little beyond our control. Getting past that today, we've got an interesting show, a couple interesting prospects. First prospect we're going to start out with is University of Central Florida linebacker Shaquem Griffin. Now, this guy is a unique prospect, second-round talent, but as people can see from the picture, missing a left hand. That's going to make it difficult at the professional level to get a lot of things done. His tackling's definitely going to be an issue at the next level. His entire left arm seems to be underdeveloped as compared to his right arm. And that is something that is probably a good bit, because one of the problems that we have for him as a linebacker is his size, 213 pounds. And where those extra 10 pounds? Probably at what was supposed to be in that left arm. So, I mean, you're taking a guy that could have been 225 pounds right now and has the build of somebody who's 225 pounds, and you lose 10 to 12 pounds of body mass there. Not only that, but his left hand. Chris, I know you probably know a little bit more about this subject, the story, so, why don't you let us in on what's going on with his left hand? Is it a birth defect? Was there an accident at some point?
Shaquem Griffin, he is the little brother of Shaquille Griffin. I believe he's the little brother of Shaquem Griffin, the guy who was in last year's draft from Central Florida.
Yes, Shaquem Griffin is...
with him,
Chris,
he only has one hand, yet at the same time, Shaquem Griffin had 57 solo tackles, 35 assisted tackles, 92 total tackles, 20 tackles for a loss, and 11 and a half sacks, despite only having one hand. And he's the brother of Shaquille Griffin. He's somebody I'm extremely high on. I do think he can start down the road despite this thing, and I don't think it's even an issue at all. I mean, 6'1", 13, maybe he'll convert to cornerback or safety with that size. He plays off the edge, and this is an intriguing player because of that, because we don't know if he'll be a corner, a safety, or they'll use him off the edge spontaneously, because he played defensive end in college, but he's only 213 pounds. So every few years we have a feel-good story in the draft. We had the Tim Tebow feel-good story. We had the Michael Sam feel-good story. Now we have the Shaquem Griffin feel-good story, because the media might hype this guy up if they find out he's this consistent on tape and only has one hand. Because this is what the media does. They find these feel-good stories and they hype them up.
well, I'll have to say Tim Tebow really wasn't a feel-good story because it was such an awful draft pick. The other guys have been picked around where they're projected. Tebow was picked about 2 rounds ahead of where he was projected. Nobody really understood it, so I really wouldn't call that a feel-good story. That's just a story of what happens when you have somebody that's making the call that at that point in time really doesn't know how to make the call. But back to Griffin, is like, we're really going to have to ask Shaquille and Shaquem Griffin's parents what the heck they were thinking, naming their kids something that sounds so similar, because this is difficult at times. But like you said, yeah, the productivity's there. The athleticism is there. The versatility is there. The only question I would have with him going to cornerback or even strong safety when it goes, if he would be used, because as you know, cover 3, 1 safety, then you have the dime backers up close, and a lot of times that if you have 2 safeties, a strong safety will convert to be that dime backer. That would be difficult for him because you have to get your hands on the corner, and he only has one hand. That would be difficult. That he's surprisingly, like you said, he's a very good tackler for not being able to hook hands. So, I mean, all the credit in the world there. And he's a good pass rusher, so like you said, he could be used off the edge on a pass rush. He's not very good in man coverage or shedding defenders when he's got the ball. And yes, he does get the ball. I mean, he had an interception against Houston, so I mean, he's had a couple pass deflections. He had 6 pass deflections if you count the Cure Bowl. So, I mean, he's not, I think he's better as a zone cover corner than he is a man cover corner, because he's smart, he gets back, he can get to the deflections, he can get an interception or 2. But as an evaluator, it really does stick in my mind that he only has one hand, even though he did have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sacks, 10.5 sacks, counting the Cure Bowl at Arkansas State. I mean, he's, as a player overall, he's got the total package. Yeah, he's just small, and that left arm is underdeveloped, and he doesn't have that hand. But if he can keep pushing that, he can keep pushing the...
He's more of a control type player. From a linebacker, from one of the safeties, and really think he can play zone, but man coverage is not good. You can't really put him on a person to make him really play like a receiver or a tight end for that matter, because he doesn't have that vision yet. And not saying that he's not going to get the vision when he goes through the NFL, but that's something that he definitely has to work on. Is his man coverage? Like you said, he's not that big as a traditional linebacker.
Yeah, and here, I think something he'd be extremely good at in the pros, something that really is quite common in the pros, which could give him a niche, is if he came into a Tampa 2 type scheme, a cover 2 type scheme. A lot of people don't realize that cover 2 isn't just about your safeties. I mean, that's mainly what it looks like, but it is a covered situation, and your linebackers have to be extremely good in zone if you're going to run the cover 2 all the time. That's, Tampa Bay in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, ran cover 2 exclusively. And their linebackers were some of the best zone linebackers in the NFL. The thing is that they don't run, most teams don't run one defensive alignment, one coverage specifically. But if you do, and that's your base, something like Tampa Bay used to do, yeah, that is where Shaquem Griffin can get into the NFL, and I think that's a place where he could get his niche. Whenever somebody runs a cover 2, bring him in. He's a good pass rusher. He's good in zone coverage. Those are his strengths. He's athletic. I mean, those, and a lot of times, that cover 2 is the most abundant defense, the most abundant coverage in the NFL right now. So if he excels in that, he could definitely be a second-day draft pick. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, Team Griffin has a lot of strong qualities on tape, and it's going to come down to whether or not he puts them together at the next level, because I feel like this is a player who could either do really well if coaches let him just go after the quarterback in situations where he's a situational pass rusher, but at the same time, if the coach says, oh, he's too small to be an edge rusher, we're going to put him at cornerback or safety and force him to drop back into coverage. If that's the case, Griffin won't succeed, or he won't play as well because of the coaching, because the coach isn't playing to his strengths.
Yeah, I see Griffin at the next level more as a niche player. I think he is more of a 3rd to 5th round pick at the next level. He'll be a guy you bring in on cover 2 situations where he gets back in zone and pass rush situations on 3rd down. But I think a lot of it is going to do, I think his draft stock, more than just, I think he will put it together. I think his draft stock is going to be more attuned to what coaches think about that left arm.
Griffin. I do have a 2nd round grade on him in my current mock draft. However, at the same time, this is a player who could easily fall to day 3 if he does not produce this season.
Yeah, he could easily fall to day 3. The day 3, and I think it. Yeah, I think day 3 could be likely. I see him as a 3rd to 5th round pick, so he'll be late day 2, early day 3 pick. This year with UCF, I think he ends up being a leader there. You know, I don't know how much more capable he is of developing his arm, but I do know that as far as pure talent goes, he's probably an early 2nd round pick. And if he produces at UCF this year, UCF only got 6 wins last year. Yeah.
Well, I have the Indianapolis Colts taking him in the 2nd round of my mock draft. In that situation, the Colts picked up John Simon to a 1-year deal, and they picked up Jabal Shear to a 1-year deal. So if those guys actually did well this season, got double-digit sacks, and they re-signed both, he would come in as a situational pass rusher in Indianapolis. Plus, I think the Colts also drafted Terrell Basham out of Ohio, so Basham could start. This guy could come in as a rotational player. So there's definitely some ways to work him in. I know the Colts are a team that's relatively deep at the safety position, so that's an interesting fit if he were to end up there.
Yeah, but the thing that I'm looking at though is UCF only had 6 wins last year. They had some horrendous defensive outings. We're talking Michigan, they gave up 51. Maryland, they gave up 30. Houston, they gave up 31. 48 to South Florida. 35 to Tulsa. Now, these totals are, they gave up 29 in a win against East Carolina. He has to step up if UCF is going to do anything this year worth note. And they're losing some pieces, and he's their one constant. So if UCF is going to win any more than 5 or 6 games, they're going to need him. What do you think UCF does this year, Chris?
With Shaquem Griffin, this is a player that you mainly want to use him as a pass rusher, but with that size, I feel like coaches are going to put him at either safety, corner, or inside linebacker. Maybe you use him in a similar role that Mark Barron was used in. And I know Mark Barron was a top 7 pick coming out of Alabama, drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2012. He was originally a safety, but then he got traded to the Rams, and the Rams said, you know what? We're going to convert this guy to inside linebacker because we're thin inside linebacker in our 34 scheme, and then they moved to a 43, and then they're moving back to a 34. But they said, we're going to move Mark Barron to a linebacker position because sometimes they would have him as an outside linebacker or a weak side or a strong side linebacker with Laurinaitis in the middle, and they're 43. Now they're moving to a 34. But Mark Barron, he is a guy that went from safety to linebacker despite his size. And maybe that's where you're going to see Shaquem Griffin go. Maybe he'll play him as a linebacker, but we're on the inside rather than the outside.
Yeah, but what does UCF do this year, Chris?
Oh, what does Central Florida do this year?
Yes.
Well, let's look at their schedule really quickly. I don't know if we have time, but Central Florida is a team that they play in the All-American Conference. They used to be in the same conference as Louisville before they moved to the ACC. So it's really interesting to see if they can run away with this conference. I believe East Carolina is in this conference. Connecticut is in this conference. Cincinnati, I think they're in the conference. The AAC is basically the modern-day version of the Big East because the Big East dissolved. They had teams like Miami, Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Syracuse, but those teams converted to the ACC. So basically, Conference USA and whatever was left over of the Big East, those teams are all jumbled into one conference, basically.
And TJ, you were a cornerback. If push comes to shove, I believe that even though UCF is going to be a little bit thin in a defensive back this year, if push comes to shove, everything you've heard here, anything you know about him, do you believe Shaquem Griffin can convert to either strong safety or cornerback as a former corner yourself?
And who are we talking about in this one?
Shaquem Griffin, University of Central Florida.
Okay. Cornerback, I don't think he'll be in the cornerback unless he has the awareness to actually in the football as for a corner to be able to move with receivers and keep up with receivers. I don't see that with him. He's more of a zoning cover type person where he can play the zone and like scheme. That's where I see that it will be best fit for him. Now, whether they try to do the Mark Barron with him where they play him at the safeties and then play him at the inside corner a little bit, that remains to be seen, but, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, so do you think he could be a safety maybe even where his brother was, if they had to have somebody back there?
No.
Oh, okay. I was just wanting to clear that up a little bit. And, moving on, we had some good discussion about Shaquem Griffin. Now we have a guy that Chris goes to bed dreaming about every night. Washington cornerback Jake Browning. Now, I'm going to say I've had to watch tape of him a couple times because I would see one thing, then I'd see something that contradicted that, then I'd see him do something else. So he's a little bit of a contradiction as far as his not his intangibles, but
I kind
his.
of oversold him a little because I initially did have a first-round grade on him, and now I moved him down to the second round after doing a SWOT report on him last week. So I'm going to let you talk about Browning for a little bit, or I can dive into that and talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses I've seen, maybe threats, opportunities as well. But seems like you had an argument about Browning you'd like to make before I started, Joey.
Yeah, he's inconsistent in everything. All of his problems are fixable. I mean, they're probably the most easily fixable of any quarterback in this class. His windup is inconsistent, but his hold, it's because his hold is high. Yeah, it's right up underneath his chin. And, that is something you'll see here in the image I just put up on the screen. It's right underneath his chin. He's got a high hold. I mean, I would like for it to be a little bit higher, maybe closer up to the shoulder. But, what he's doing there, about 4/5, that's perfectly acceptable. So, it's really good to see a young quarterback being able to, have that high hold. But then he winds up. That means he has to take the ball from that high point, that strong high point where it's you can snap off the pass easily, bring it around, and then throw it. It makes no sense. But at the same time, he does have the high hold, so it would be easier to just get him to, snap that off because you don't have to fix everything. You just have to tell him, don't wind up, don't wind up, don't wind up. And just keep pressing that rather than break down his mechanics. So that's extremely encouraging. I think a lot of the problems with his touch, are geared to the wind up. You'll see quarterbacks, a lot of quarterbacks in this, if they have a wind up, they don't always have as good a touch on the ball. Whereas if they snap it off, they have more control over it. They're able to get that touch in there, able to get a little teardrop in over the shoulder. There are times, he has good steps. He has good footwork. Steps up well. He always keeps his eyes up. He has good arm strength. Guy's got a cannon for an arm. I love it. Got good vision. Surprisingly good mobility. But he throws off his back foot every now and then. His footwork's not that great. And that's the main reason he throws off his back foot. Sometimes he gets his feet a little bit, jumbled up there. But when his footwork's on, that's when he doesn't throw off his back foot. So, he uses his arm strength for most of his throws. Tries to throw it through people. And it turns out well because he does have such a strong arm. Even throwing off the back foot. But at the same time, you have to look and say the footwork is something you want to correct. And the footwork will take care of throwing off the back foot. Getting rid of the wind-up should take care of the problems with his touch, or at least most of them. And I say Browning is a quarterback with some flaws, but when it comes to quarterbacks with these flaws, such as the touch, the wind-up, I'd say he is the most easily correctable quarterback in this class. He can correct his issues more easily than anybody else in this class. Chris, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an accurate assessment. Here's what I've got with my Jake Browning SWOT report. This is a guy that has more muscle on his arm than Darnold or Lamar Jackson. His arm and body carry a lot of muscle. He has potential to have really good throwing power, but he needs to tap into that because there are scouts that have questions with his arm strength. And that was the same exact issue Brady Quinn had at Notre Dame. He had a lot of muscle on his arm, but some scouts thought he didn't have the arm strength to be an NFL quarterback. Same exact issue with Browning. Can make laser-like throws at times, has ideal size, not great size, but ideal size. And short and medium accuracy is there. He can play in any type of offense. I think the West Coast offense would probably best suit him. A balanced run-first offense. He has a running back there. I think he can play in a vertical offense, but that's probably the one offense he'd struggle in the most. And then the shotgun spread offense. So Browning is a quick learning rate. His mechanics, his ball placement on throws, I think they're better than any quarterback in last year's draft. Coaches and teammates rave about him. They talk about his work ethic, how it's better than any quarterback in this class. His passer rating was actually higher than both Sam Darnold and Lamar Jackson at 167.5. Darnold was like 164, and Lamar Jackson was 158. This is a guy who can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I look for quarterbacks that can try and make up to 6 progressions before taking off and running, but this is a guy that can make at least 5 progressions. The potential to add a 6th progression playing under there. As far as footwork goes, Joey, this is a guy that can make 3-step and 5-step drops. But at the same time, I feel like he relies on those throws where he's not going to make his best throws unless he's making a 3-step or 5-step throw. If he makes a 1-step throw, he'll use his back foot, like you said. If he makes a 7-step throw, he'll hold on the ball too long. Let's look at some more weaknesses with Jake Browning. He underthrows and overthrows a lot of passes despite having incredible muscle on his arm. Inconsistent accuracy at times on throws like Darnold. Deep ball accuracy is an issue with Browning. I mean, a lot of people in the scouting community are saying he lacks arm strength, and while that may be too true to an extent, I feel like his deep ball accuracy is more of a concern than him lacking the deep ball, because I've seen him throw it deep. I've seen the laser arm. He's not someone who can just dagger it in there like Josh Allen or Sam Darnold. But he's not a guy with a dagger for an arm, but he's a guy who really can throw it deep and make some laser throws. Think Seth Russell or Bryce Petty. They had the ability to make laser throws, but they just couldn't dagger it in there on the deep passes. They didn't have that dagger for an arm.
Yeah, and here's the thing, though, Chris.
The work ethic, the football IQ, the field vision, the throwing into coverage, those are 2 of Browning's intangibles he still struggles with. You can have a good learning rate. You can have a good football IQ. That's all great and stuff. But if you don't have the field vision, you throw into coverage, you're still going to have intangibles you need to work on. His completion percentage dropped last year. The worst part is he actually took less sacks last year, and his completion percentage declined. I don't think I've ever seen that with a quarterback, so that's pretty interesting. This is a guy who never threw for 3,500 yards. Some scouts question his arm strength, throwing power, velocity on tape. A lot of people are comparing his arm to Colt McCoy. I see something more along the lines of Kirk Cousins. Not good, but he can correct the issues he has with his arm strength. Michigan State correct that in the NFL. I see that similar thing with Browning. I don't necessarily think his player comp matches up to Kirk Cousins, but I see a similar trait in Cousins than I do with Browning. And here's another thing. He relied a lot on John Ross and Dante Pettis. 33 of his 43 touchdowns went to either John Ross or Dante Pettis. And on at least 15% of those plays, he just threw the ball to Ross immediately without reading other progressions. So he doesn't have that luxury this year. Opportunities, I'm not going to go into the teams that he could get drafted by. I do see a boomer bust quarterback. There are moments where he plays like Ben Roethlisberger versus mediocre teams, and then there are times where he plays like Brady Quinn versus big-time opponents. Team against Alabama, where his performance versus Alabama practically rivals Brady Quinn's woeful game versus LSU. And then finally, we're looking at the threats. Jake Browning failed to report an injury during the season leading up to surgery. So if he gets injured this year, scouts are going to question if he has durability concerns. And failing to report an injury, you can argue that shows poor communication skills. Quarterbacks have to communicate with their teammates and coaches. Darnold, Lamar Jackson, they're both excellent communicators. Jake Browning, very passionate quarterback, plays with a lot of fire, needs to communicate a little bit better, and he has to know when to channel that intensity if he's going to succeed in the NFL. My potential grade for Jake Browning, 87 out of 99. I think he can be a solid starter, but there are some things he needs to work on. Any thoughts on this? Because he did break some California state records in high school despite having issues. So that's pretty much it for my Browning SWAT report. A little bit long, but I wanted to try my best to get all of the details in there with Jake Browning. Any thoughts, Joey, TJ?
Yeah, I think you probably sleep with a Jake Browning play. The arm strength, I'll say it's easy to say, hey, we think he has poor arm strength because he throws off his back foot. That limits arm strength. He uses a windup. That limits arm strength. That's why I say, these guys with this windup, I mean, I bet you they have monster arms, but they're using all that energy to wind up. They're throwing off their back foot, which takes more strength and lowers velocity. So, I mean, TJ, you got to think, when it comes to arm strength with Browning, knowing that he throws off his back foot and winds up, his arm strength has a chance to explode this year if he can get even one of those things fixed.
Well, I think he doesn't lack the arm strength. I think what he lacks will probably just a little bit of the accuracy. He's accurate on some throws and some throws that he's not accurate on. I think he can be a playmaker. He is a pocket passer, but when he can he know how to read the defense and know what plays to do as far as running the play action and just reading how the defense will set up and play. I don't think that's the problem. I think just trusting his own forward power and putting the ball in tight situations where the receivers actually go and get his biggest.
And this is
and he'll learn that process when he gets to the NFL, and he's learning that process as he plays. But one concern that I do have is that he's only 6'2", and he's only 205 pounds. And to be that, and you're going against people like, that big four linebackers,
yeah.
That's not safe. We see what happened to Blaine Gabbert when he's only 6'4" and he's underweight. He got hurt. Same for Robert Griffin, underweight, running a lot, got hurt. So hopefully we don't see the same incident that happened to Browning.
Yeah, and those are some really good points, and actually goes to some of what Chris was saying in his long diatribe. It was that, the accuracy, Chris said the deep accuracy was a little bit poor. The size is a huge one that Chris or myself, neither one mentioned. So you made a couple really good points on that, and something that mentioned, Chris mentioned the Kirk Cousins comparison. Kirk Cousins was 210, 215 pounds, I think, and I think that's a really good comparison overall. And you're right, TJ, he's going to have to learn to read the field because, like Chris said, a lot of times he could make those reads, but a lot of times he did know he had John Ross. He had John Ross, he knew he had John Ross, and all he had to do was throw it up and Ross would go get it. Now he's going to have to, because we know he can make the reads, now we've got to see him do it because he doesn't have John Ross to, say, hey, this guy's going to blow past there. All I have to do is throw it up. Doesn't matter where I throw it. He's going to get to it because everybody knows how fast Ross was. He could just run underneath the ball no matter where the ball was. Now, Chris, to your point, yeah, to your point, Chris.
I think that has to do with, just trusting in himself that he can make that play. It's that much so that he can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that he can do it. I mean, we see it from time to time that he can probably do it. But the problem is that, is he going to make that play in the NFL? That is the question.
Yeah.
He's going to make that play at that right time, in the correct situation in the NFL.
Yeah, and to Chris's point, Chris said that he had less sacks, but a lower completion percentage. He also had fewer interceptions. Now, what he also did, he threw 27 more passes, had 10 more completions, but his yards per attempt were up by 0.74. So he had a completion percentage, or yards per average, and in 2015 he had an 8.03. Remember, this is only his third season as a starter for this team. Yeah, he took over for Jake Locker, I believe it was. So he had a lower percentage, but he went from 2,955 yards to 3,430. And that was on about 24 more passes and only 10 more completions. His quarterback rating went from, his raw quarterback rating went from 56 to 76.6, and his adjusted quarterback rating went from 60.8 to 81.3. He had some monster games where he had 304 yards, 378 yards, 338 yards. So, and he had 61% completion. He had 78% completion. He had 82% completion. He had 71.4. At the same time, he came back. USC had 47. He had 50 against Oregon State. He had 37 against Colorado. So, yeah, that gives the consistency. To TJ's point, he's got to have confidence in his reads. He can make them. He can do it. He's just got to get up there and prove to himself that he can do it. Yeah, so he's one of these quarterbacks. He's still in development. This is only his third year. He's got all the raw traits, but he's still in development. That should tell you there, when I see a quarterback that's still in development, it's like Darnold. Darnold, he's still in development. Less because of anything he did, and more because of his coaches refusing to fix it. But he said, okay, I know I need to develop, and he went to Jesse Palmer with here. I think that Browning, I don't think he needs to go to Jesse Palmer or anybody like that. I think he's got good coaches. So I believe that with this year is a very good mix of, in college football and potentially the NFL draft, of quarterbacks who need a lot of development and quarterbacks who are ready to go. It is a very good mix. And I believe that this year, quarterback-wise, I think I said it before, is going to be an excellent rat race to watch, because you do have these guys. I am excited to see how some of these guys develop. And Browning is no exception to that. So I've got to ask, please listen to the question closely. We know everybody likes to go off on their own little way. So listen closely. Again, last year, they're losing John Ross. They're losing a couple other good players. They lost to Alabama in the Peach Bowl. So, what does Washington do this season? Do they regress? Do they take a step back? Do they get back to the playoffs? What do they do with Browning being the sole leader of that offense? Do they take a step? Do they stay where they are? Or do they take a step back? Chris, we're going to go with you first.
Well, what's interesting with the Washington Huskies, because they're a team that really needs to pull everything together with the schedule. And the Washington Huskies, their schedule this year is pretty interesting. They got a few commitments for the next 2 years in Jacob Sermon and Dylan Morris, so if Browning declares that's not going to be an issue. September 1st, they go to Rutgers. They host Montana. They host Fresno State. September 23rd, at Colorado in Boulder. I know Colorado only has one player returning on secondary, Afolabi Laguda. His nickname is Agent Uno. Darnold carved him on tape versus USC. This is a guy I had a first-round grade on at one point because I loved his nickname, Agent Uno, but Darnold carved him. Everyone else on that secondary held their own. Laguda was the one guy that got carved. September 30th, they face Oregon State in Corvallis. Now, Oregon State has a 2019 first-round corner, Xavier Crawford. He's a sophomore redshirt. If he dominates this year, he could technically declare. So you've got two tough road games. You get California, you get Arizona State. The homecoming game is against UCLA. They didn't play UCLA last year. So Josh Rosen and Jake Browning facing off on homecoming in and then November 4th, they host Oregon. November 10th, they travel to Stanford. So that game is going to be on FS1. They humiliated Stanford last year, but now they're going into a road environment. And the thing to consider is Stanford's starting corners, both of them were injured in last year's game in Washington. This year they could both be healthy, and Stanford will have the home crowd on their side. And then to wrap up the year, you get Utah at home and Washington State at home. So if you can get by this early part of the schedule where you're facing Colorado and Oregon State, the potential to make a run is there because they don't face USC this year in the regular season. So that's one thing that actually works in their advantage.
And TJ, what do you think that Washington does this year with Jake Browning as its sole leadership?
Hopefully develop him and make him to become a better quarterback. And it's not like he doesn't have the great the footwork, because he has footwork, but the problem is that his footwork is not elite, and it's not to a point where it's horrible. He needs work. Passes, he needs to have he needs to believe that he can make the smart passes, also the clutch passes, to where he can not only help himself, but to help his receivers become better as they progress through this year. You know, if you get his stock higher, that's what they wanted to look for in the NFL. And his mental toughness, can he be tough enough to take hits and just be able to play with durability, because he's only 6'2", and 205 playing quarterback.
That's a good point, TJ. I quickly want to mention Washington's supporting cast on the offensive side of the ball before we get to Joey's thoughts on Washington this upcoming season. Myles Gaskin is returning at running back. He's only 5'10", 195 pounds, but he had over 1,000 yards. He's a great pass catcher. Dante Pettis, who had 13 touchdowns, and receiving touchdown. So him and Ross and Pettis got a majority of the touchdowns, and then all their offensive linemen are returning. So if those linemen can develop and give Browning more time in the pocket, that could be huge for him this season because, again, Colorado is probably the toughest opponent Washington has because they humiliated them in the Pac-12 championship, and Colorado's going to want revenge, and the game is in Boulder. I mean, they get UCLA at home and Stanford on the road in November 10th. on a Friday night. So I'm looking at those 3 games as their toughest games of the year because Colorado, UCLA, Stanford, those are really the tough games on Washington's schedule. And if they can get by those games, maybe they can go unbeaten heading into the Pac-12 championship if they were to play a team like USC. Because they don't get USC on their regular season schedule, but I see them getting USC in the Pac-12 championship. So I really like their schedule. It's very favorable for them this year.
Yeah, I actually think that Washington could go undefeated this year. I don't think their schedule is as tough as their schedule last year. The teams they played, all those teams lost a lot of players that are better, I think. Other than John Ross, I think the teams they played lost better players than Washington lost. So I think Washington's in a better spot to be a very good team. I think they could go undefeated and potentially go back to the Peach Bowl to face whoever it is they could possibly face. Maybe even a rematch against Alabama. Who knows? But I want to bring it up, stuff that I didn't mention before. In 2015, his first year as starter, Browning had 16 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. 2016, he had 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So, if you look at it from what he does, if his coaches can get him to even just work on his footwork or his wind up or just correct a little bit of these issues.
Yeah, the thing with Jake Browning is he did not have Dante Pettis or John Ross that year. I think maybe he had Pettis because Pettis may have been a true freshman. John Ross was injured that entire 2015 season when Jake Browning was a freshman. So you got to take that into consideration as well, Joey, because John Ross went in the top 10, and he was injured the entire 2015 season. But scouts didn't really talk about that. That sort of went the radar, buried like a dead body. So, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, this was a learning experience for him. He's going to come out now and say, this is my team in 2017, my game, and I'm going to take advantage of it. So, I've got to say, I'm looking forward to seeing Washington. I'm looking forward to seeing Browning. So, and folks,
this is an easy schedule for Washington. Like you said, they could go 12-0. I mean, if Browning puts up good numbers and correct is on tape, it's not inconceivable for him to be the guy who ends up winning the Heisman. So that's Joey, but it's not inconceivable with the schedule they have. Does that mean they're going to be a playoff team or winning the entire college football playoff? Of course not. But with the schedule, winning the Heisman is actually possible for Jake Browning.
Yeah, and that very good point. And ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for today. If you like the video, feel free to like and share. Leave comments below. Know that, we know that some of you got...
I was going to upload the entire thing to YouTube, but the computer froze right at the end of the show, so you'll have to tune into the Evolution Network. I'm so sorry, audience. You have to tune into the Evolution Network. You can only get it on Joey's YouTube channel, so you're going to have to subscribe and hit that like button, folks.
Thank you, Chris. For TJ and Chris and everybody at the Evolution Network, I'm Joseph Potter. Have fun and take care.